Hey guys, how's it going? So, I thought that I would today cover a couple of things. First, I wanted to cover the fact that this was just announced as a teaser, and they're going to go over tomorrow. So, Summer Luluca and Lethe, whoever that is coming out on the 19th, but Luluca is coming out on the 5th, or well, she's being showed off on the 5th, and most likely coming out the day after, I believe, especially with the fact that she's going to be revealed at that time. So, it makes sense. Maybe there would be a week divide, but regardless, basically two summer characters back to back, and I believe they're also showing off the Celine skin tomorrow, so there's that to look forward to as well. But I gotta say, I'm pretty hyped for these characters. They have really good designs, they have really good looking S3s. I think it's going to be super cool, so I'm very interested to see what happens. And the second thing that I want to cover in this video is I wanted to talk about possible fixes to RTA. So I made a video about a week back or something talking about all the problems with RTA and how it's kind of a mess right now and people are feeling a little burned out and tired of it and stuff like that. So I wanted to make a video where I talked about possible fixes for RTA and things that could be good. I don't want to only be like negative and say like, oh, this is a problem, and then, you know, not do anything else. So I thought it'd be something kind of interesting to cover. But this is basically all the news for right now for this, and I think tomorrow we'll find out exactly what's going on. I'll probably put something up for that when we actually get all the news for it and my impressions of it. But let's move on to fixes to RTA. So, I've played a lot of RTA in my days, although this season I've been kind of limiting myself because I'm not the biggest fan of how it is. But I want to talk about some changes they could potentially make, or things to at least spice it up or make it more interesting. So, the main ones that everyone talks about, including me, are nerf characters, which is going to make a lot of players unhappy, even though I'd say it overall helps the game a lot, and Smallgate doesn't really want to. Banning units, which is like, let's say this season there's no Sea Lilius or Lua or Angel of Light or something along those lines, right? And then the other one is adding characters that counter units. We've seen like Benimaru and like Moon Bunny Dominion, and they just don't really work. If they make a character that really hard counters them, they might be completely broken, so it might not even be good to do. Those are the three main ways people talk about. But then there's a bunch of other possible solutions, and just a few things that I came up with I thought would be kind of interesting to talk about. So one of the things that we've seen Smallgate do for changing this and to really spice up seasons is the Battle Frenzy system. So currently the Battle Frenzy is if you have an element weakness against the opponents, your fire and their water, you do 30% less damage. And that's the only real Battle Frenzy they have. They sped it up a little bit this season, where they made it so it ramps up like a little bit faster and the damage a little faster and you lose health a little bit faster. But that's kind of it. That's the entire Battle Frenzy. No extra speed to units, nothing interesting. And Battle Frenzy has always been like their way of balancing it for seasons now, where they're like, oh, let's add speed to this class or something like that to try and change the meta. And it's worked to a decent degree, but the mage speed we had one for like 2 seasons or something was kind of lame. And I would really like to see Smallgate expand upon that more, because I think there's some interesting things they could do to give temporary boosts to characters. But along with that, something that they could do is they could just straight up buff certain characters for a season. So they could say like, I don't know, Mui gets an extra like 6 speed, and then suddenly you're going to be like, okay, well, Mui seems like a viable option. She might not be the best opener overall, but now that she's so fast, you can use her to contest other openers potentially. So I think something like that could actually be really interesting for them to add. And maybe if people really like the changes, it's something they could even eventually buff for the character. So it's almost like a testing ground, but also kind of a safe testing ground for Smallgate to be like, okay, this isn't good, let's scrap that. And they can be a little bit careful about what they're actually doing. But Battle Frenzy is definitely one of those things that has always been pretty solid, I feel. And I would like to see them do more with it, especially during preseason. They do nothing during the preseason. They're just like, okay, here's the preseason, guys. We're not going to test anything. All right, here's the season. It's the same thing as the preseason. I don't really understand that. And they do have the World Cup coming up, so they might want to try and make it kind of basic. So they don't want to make a crazy Battle Frenzy and then have the World Cup with the same rules, and maybe they don't like how the meta works out. But not the biggest fan of how they handled that. Now, another possible thing, adding bans. Well, we get 2 bans per person. A lot of people are like, maybe they should add 3 bans. But some people have been talking about, if you add 3 bans, then Cleave is going to be out of control. There's multiple popular Cleave teams at the moment. There's still some Ahmed cleavers, then there's like the Zio, Jacko, Ran cleavers running around as well. There's even some people doing some like sort of ML Powell cleave and some other things, or Summer Break Charlotte cleave. So there's enough cleave variety right now that I think if you add bans, it would actually make it harder to fight, because they can just be like, okay, I'm banning Karina, I'm banning like Edward, I'm banning Aiden, and they can just take out so many of the main counters right now and then flex to whatever cleave team will be able to beat the remainder. That's something that a lot of people are kind of worried about, but adding bans can be a good solution. It's just that, where does it end? Are they just going to keep adding bans? So we're like, okay, we're tired of like Lua, Celius, Angel, Light, so now we get 3 bans. Then they're going to add another character eventually, and people are going to be like, where's the 4th ban? We need 4 bans per people. So it's really like, you have to get to the root of the problem, rather than just constantly adding bans to get rid of these units. It's like, at that point, just nerf the unit or ban them for the entire season. Like, don't just keep adding bans because there's so many OP units. You gotta get to the source, and it's a real pain. But I mean, adding bans is nice, but it's like putting a band-aid on the problem. So here's another possibility. Let's just look at this match, for example. Something that some people have talked about is changing how the draft phase works. So what if it was, instead of, you know, first pick, I get 1 unit, then they get 2, then 2, then 2, then 2, then 1? What if instead of doing that, it was like first ban, or first pick, then they get 2 picks, then I get 2 picks, then they get 1 pick, and then you go through a second phase where each person pre-bans another character. That's an interesting thing that's been brought up by people, because then you can see how their team is kind of trending towards, and then get rid of a character that you wouldn't want to fight based on your team comp and their team comp. That actually adds a lot more strategy to RTA, and I think it's kind of interesting. The one downside, I guess, would be that it makes the draft take longer, and the draft can already take quite a bit of time. Maybe they could reduce the overall time it takes at the pre-ban at the beginning, or maybe some of the picks just take a few seconds off overall so that they can add all that towards that middle ban timer. That's a possibility, and it could be pretty good. That's something that people have definitely brought up. I just thought of a random one as well. I don't know if this is a good idea, I just randomly thought of this, but like, in general, first pick is generally seen as much stronger. So what if it was something like, you first pick a unit, they pick 2 units, but their second unit is like hidden or something until you pick your next 2 units, and then it gets revealed. I don't know if that would be too broken, but that's just a random idea I thought of that would be kind of interesting, because traditionally everyone always is like, oh, first pick is super strong and you get to be the aggressor and the opponent can't really try and speed contest you and other stuff like that as easy. So maybe that would be something interesting, at least something that they could try during the preseason at least, or maybe like a rule for mock lobbies to test out. Just something to think about. So we talked about a bunch of things, but there's some other ones that I think would be good. So there's characters like Lu and Celius and Angel of Light, and, you know, people don't like Apocalypse Ravier when Hua Young was strong. And they add EEs to characters, but let's be real. A lot of EEs they add suck. Now there's some exceptions, so such as, you know, Shu has this insane EE. What if they made the EEs a little more focused towards dealing with some of these problem units too? So they could have an EE like Shu, has this one, which is amazing. Nobody really uses the other 2 basically ever, especially not the S2 one. That one is terrible. That one is like, wait, I'm going to the wrong thing. That one is like, increases damage dealt by Fruit. Nobody uses that. Now, what if somehow they changed it or something like that, and it was a different option, something that punished enemies taking like an extra turn or something? So if characters like Celius or Lua became popular, you could then be like, all right, I'm going to swap this from the chop one to the whatever this would be. Maybe it would be part of her S3 passive or something along those lines. I think what they could do is make EEs a little more interesting, where you actually have a choice between multiple things. In this case, obviously, everyone's going to take chop. But if this one was something that was actually very valid at possibly countering some of these problem units, then it could be like, oh, when the meta has these really popular characters that are terrorizing everybody, like, I don't know, Angel Light or Aiden first pick is too strong, then maybe this would be something that could help deal with it. Like, maybe she would have increased chance to hit or something if it was an evasion meta, and then so you would swap to that temporarily, but then when that meta fades out, you'd be like, oh, I'll go to the chop one. What I'm saying is, if they made EEs actually interesting, where it's not just always one OP option, the others kind of suck, if they made the EEs actually have some versatility, and it could be used as sort of like a soft way of countering certain characters. And so if there was a lot more of that, I think it would help balance things a little bit, because then people would also be able to swap based on the situation, which I think would be really cool. Some other things that I thought of is, what if they added a element synergy bonus or something along those lines? So For instance, maybe they could have something like, based on the elements of your team, you get different bonuses. Now, this would add a lot of complexity to the game. So let's say if you had like one of every element, you would get some sort of bonus of some sort. If you had multiple characters of the same element, you would get some sort of bonus. And maybe they could tailor these bonuses or change them based on season, or they could tailor them towards dealing with certain characters that are very frustrating. Like if you have like, I don't know, let's say Lua's out of control. If you have like 3 green units on your team, you get some sort of bonus. Or maybe if you focus enough on an element, like it'll lessen the effect of the battle frenzy and increase your odds of hitting certain elements or something like that. So if you have 3 green characters, then they don't have the 50% chance to miss on fire units or something, you know, just as random example. But I just think there's a lot of room for growth and interesting things there. And Smallgate doesn't really test anything during preseason, and the meta has gotten pretty stale for a lot of people, and people are frustrated with the amount of cleave they're fighting, etc. And I just think these kind of things could be a possible option. Now, the last thing I thought of, and this is a little more complex, and this would change a lot, but at one point they said they were going to rework Guardians, and I got excited. I was like, oh man, there could be a lot of cool things they do. And then they ended up doing literally nothing, and also you still can't level Guardians. I don't even know what's up with that. But I was thinking, what if they completely reworked Guardians? Like, absolutely reworked it. And instead of using souls to do effects and stuff like that, they could almost be like a team leader, or like a pet thing that you had. So you would be like, okay, I'm running this kind of team. Like I'm running a tank down team. So I'm going to use, let's say, Arky has a bonus for increasing the bulkiness of your team, and maybe under certain conditions it would activate and do something. So it wouldn't just be like, oh, I have, you know, 30 souls, I use Arky and do damage, and you could actually run it in PvP. So then there could almost be like archetypes of teams, and these Guardians would cater towards those. So there could be a Guardian that's like, oh, it's good for resisting debuffs, or this one's good for tanking down, or this one's good for cleave and fast teams, or this one's, you know, for a bunch of different stuff like that. This one's for control. I think that would be something kind of interesting. Obviously, that's really complex. It makes it more difficult, I guess, to play the game and optimize things, and it changes the game's balance completely. But that was just something I thought could be kind of interesting. I just think there's a lot of stuff that could be explored. Obviously, you know, the Guardians might be a little too complicated, and changing all the EEs is a little too much, but I do wish they explored stuff like Battle Frenzy a little bit more, and I think that Smallgate kind of sits back and doesn't really modify these things too much. I remember a long time ago they had the Battle Frenzy of whenever you killed an opponent's character, your whole team got a 15% CR push. They removed that within like a week or two because people were like, this is broken, this is unbelievable towards aggro and cleave, and they immediately removed it. But it sort of felt like Smallgate said, oh, you don't like our ideas? You don't want this? Alright, fine, we'll just go simple stuff. 7 speed to mages, 7 speed to the... And it just became really boring. And it's not that players like hated them experimenting with stuff, it's just, you know, they hated that particular thing and they just want to see more interesting things come out. So hopefully after this season, after the World Cup settled and all that, they'll try and experiment with some interesting stuff, because it's stale. And these are just some possible ideas, because, you know, I complain about the game, but I love it. And if I'm going to complain all the time, may as well try and come up with some solutions rather than just sit here and do absolutely nothing, right? Anyways, that's about all for now. Just want to talk about these things, and I appreciate you watching, if you made it to the end of the video even. But thanks a lot, and I hope to see you next time. Don't forget to leave a like or subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you later.